Welcome to this presentation on Vedic astrology. I hope that during this presentation, you'll start to get an understanding about astrology and how it can relate directly to your life and what you deal with on a daily basis, and how it can also provide some remedies and some ideas about how to deal with the problems and the situations that you deal with in daily life. In India and in many parts of Asia, astrology has always been a tool that is used by people to make decisions on a daily basis, whether about marriage, starting a business, travel, spiritual path. Astrology is a tool that is used frequently by everyone. And most villages have a village astrologer, families have family astrologers. Astrology has fallen into disuse in the West because of a lot of suppression. A lot of the information, a lot of the wisdom has been lost. But in India, that knowledge, that wisdom has been preserved in a very beautiful way. So I'd like to start explaining to you how this all works. We're going to start by understanding a universal principle that applies to astrology, but also applies to the healing arts. This was stated by Hermes Trismegistus in the Emerald Tablet and is the foundation of the Hermetic sciences in the West. It is true, it is sure, it is the full truth. As above, so below, and as below, so above. The wonders of the one are enacted. So what this means is that for everything that's going on in the microcosm, inside of our body, inside of our minds, there are corresponding substances, planets, herbs, stones, rocks that correspond energetically to what's outside of us. And this principle is very important starting from the inside out because it gives us a way to connect with energies outside of ourselves based on the principle of resonance. And it also helps us to know how to correct something if it's out of balance. For example, as you can see from this illustration here, the sun, which is the center of our solar system, has a very strong correspondence with the heart, which is the center of our bodies. And just as the sun provides light and what we need to live to the whole solar system, the heart pumps the blood and provides the vitality and the life to our body. So that, for example, is a correspondence. The sun and the heart correspond to each other. And so if somebody had heart problems, we might be looking at what's going on with the sun in their Vedic chart. And we may also be looking at herbs that correspond to the sun as well. That might be a medicine for that person. We're going to start by doing an overview of the 5 elements. The 5 elements are used as a way of organizing the information about astrology in terms of the planets and the signs. They're also used in acupuncture and Ayurveda, and many healing systems and spiritual systems have information about the 5 elements. And we're going to start with the coarsest element first, which is earth. So earth is the densest, coarsest element. It has the most, potential energy. In other words, it's kind of locked up and not very much kinetic energy. It doesn't have a lot of free energy. It's mostly potential energy. And it is solid. It's grounded. Everything we think about the earth, those qualities of being grounded, of being solid, of being dense, of being kind of static. Those are some qualities of the earth element. There are sounds associated with each of these elements, and these sounds come from the yogic tradition. In the astrological tradition, we have many different ways of choosing mantras and creating mantras. But for this presentation, I'm sticking with the yogic correspondences, which are the simplest ones. And the sound associated with earth is la. And when you say la, it kind of brings the energy back down into your body. The water element is the next one up the scale in terms of potential energy. It has the water is fluid, has the quality of fluidity, and it has a little bit of kinetic energy, but it's mostly potential energy as earth. By the way, earth corresponds to the sense of smell. The sense of smell is a very basic sense that touches people in very deep ways. This is why aromatherapy can be so powerful, because smell goes right to a very deep part of the brain that accesses emotions in a way that other senses don't necessarily do. So, as I said, earth is associated with smell, and water is associated with taste. So how things taste has a lot to do with the water element. And the fluids in the body, of course, relate to the water element. So hormones, blood, lymph, all of these are watery substances in our body. And the sound syllable associated with water is vam. The air element going up the scale is getting more kinetic energy, not as much potential energy, of course. You can't see air. And air, the power of air or the quality of air is really to scatter things and dissipate things, blow them away, so to speak. It's associated with the pranas or the chi in the body, and the quality of differentiating and the sense of touch. You can feel wind blowing on you, and when you feel it, you kind of know you are separate from the other person. Touch kind of puts you in touch with others, but it also, because you are being in touch, you also know that there's a separateness there. And so that sense of separation and dissipating things and coming back in touch to be back together again is associated with air. And the seed syllable is yam. The fire element is, of course, associated with both heat and light. Heat being pleasurable or not pleasurable, depending on whether it's too strong or not strong enough. And the fire element relates to the sense of sight. So the eyes are very much connected with the fire element. You can see a person's fire energy, so to speak, through their eyes. And there's a lot of energy, of course, in fire. It burns, and the quality of fire is to go up, as opposed to earth, which is what goes down. So the seed syllable ram raises the energy up. And finally, the fifth element that gathers together the other elements is the ether element, or the space element. And it has a kind of magnetic quality of bringing everything together in an undifferentiated, harmonious, blissful way. The space element is the element that brings balance to the universe by just holding everything together as one, as a unity, as an integrated whole, as opposed to the other elements, especially like the wind element, which separates things. The ether element brings everything together and harmonizes it and magnetizes it so that it all becomes one. If we didn't have the ether element in our body, all the different elements in our body or all the different parts wouldn't be able to work together. But it's the way that the human body is just so miraculous in being able to function in such a complicated way, and everything works pretty well. That is a function of the ether element. The sense that's associated with the ether element is sound, and this is why sound is such a powerful healing force, and why in Vedic astrology we actually use mantra and sound healing as a way to bring a harmonious vibration into our system that can heal us both emotionally and physically. Sound is also associated with creation. In many creation stories, the word or the sound comes first. So these are some ways that sound is associated with the ether element and the sound hum is the seed syllable hum is associated with ether. So these 5 element sounds, as I was mentioning earlier, are associated with the yogic tradition and associated with the chakras in the body. This is starting at the bottom here. We have Lam, which is the earth element, and then Vam, which is the water element, and then Ram, which is the fire, and Yam, which is the wind, and finally Hum, which is space, and then Om, which is the universal seed syllable that encompasses all 5 of the other elements. So this is how they are used in the yogic tradition. And as I said before, this system is used in astrology, and we also have many other systems of mantras and sound healing depending on the needs of the client. But I wanted to just demonstrate this one as it is well known to many people who are studying yoga. Another correspondence between these elements comes from the Ayurvedic tradition of healing. And you can see in this diagram how the 3 doshas, vata, being here between ether and air, and the vata dosha, of course, being associated with kind of dryness and nervousness and ungroundedness, that kind of thing. Pitta, which is associated with the fire element, and being hot and burning things. And then kapha, which is here between earth and water, being associated with the more dense dosha of slowness and dullness, that sort of thing. So Ayurveda and acupuncture and other energy medicines do make use of this 5-element system that we are now going to explore in further detail in terms of astrology. So again, we're going to go through the elements, and we're going to see how they correspond to planets. And in the system that I learned in India, I went to India several times to study intensively a very esoteric form of Vedic astrology. We start with the element Earth, and the planet associated with Earth in this system is Mercury. In some systems, Saturn. And we can kind of see why when we get to Saturn. You'll kind of see why you could kind of go both ways. But I'm going to emphasize here the system that I studied and am most familiar with. So Mercury is the planet that's the closest to the sun, of course, and it's the densest of all the planets. And the Earth, as being the earth element, Mercury gives form and structure for information and involves memory retention. If you have a good memory, it's probably because you have a good Mercury in your chart. The word in Sanskrit for Mercury is Buddha, that's the name, which comes from the word buddhi, which means intelligence. And Mercury is like a little child who lacks the power of discrimination and just wants to play and kind of go back and forth. If you think of the actual element Mercury, which is quicksilver, which is what we put in thermometers, it's that idea of something that's very reactive, very quick to move, and changeable all the time. For example, Mercury as a planet in astrology, if it's with good planets, it's a good guy, and when it's with bad planets, it becomes a bad guy. So it has this changeability and this way of going back and forth between different states. It's, if your Mercury is strong, you may be very good at debating. You might be very good at, as I said, memory. It has everything to do with speech and communication. I think a lot of people are familiar with, the fact that, when Mercury's retrograde, communications get all scrambled. So we have this understanding that Mercury has to do with communication. And here we see a picture of the Mercury as a Greek god, really associated with Hermes as well, and this idea of communication. So if Mercury is afflicted in your chart, you may have problems with communication. If Mercury is good, you may be able to learn foreign languages very easily. You may be very good at computer science. People may understand you really well. Mercury is also kind of a trickster. So humor, being witty, organizing information. All of those are mercurial traits that can be improved if you have an afflicted Mercury, or you may already be doing well with that and have a good Mercury. Mercury also likes to synthesize and bring unusual things together. One example of this is the vitalistic healing program that I teach, for example. I do have a strong Mercury. One of the ways you can tell that is I do a lot of these sort of online type of teaching things. And I like to talk. I like to explain things. And one of my astrology teachers once said to me, "Oh, the reason you drive a Prius, which is a hybrid car, is because of your strong Mercury, because a Prius is a hybrid. It's a synthesis of two things, a gas engine and an electric system." So that's kind of, you would say a Prius is sort of a mercurial thing because it's kind of bringing things together. And the vitalistic healing program that I teach, as I was just saying, is a synthesis of Vedic astrology, Paracelsian plant alchemy, and Buddhist spiritual practice. So again, I'm kind of synthesizing these things together, and that's a very mercurial quality. The parts of the body that are affected by Mercury include the lungs, the nervous system, and the skin. And so if you have an afflicted Mercury and it's in certain kinds of placements, it might cause lung problems like asthma or chronic coughs, or it may cause problems on the skin. And the emerald, the stone associated with Mercury, is one of the remedies that we might use to help an afflicted Mercury. So thoughts of career and business, going back and forth, working in that way are definitely associated with Mercury. And the sound syllable, again, for the earth element, which could be used to strengthen Mercury, is lam. Venus is the planet associated with the water element. As they say, men are from Mars and women are from Venus. So Venus is the water planet, is the planet associated with relationships, with beauty, with luxury, with sexuality, sensuality, enjoyment. In terms of body parts, the ovaries and the kidneys and semen are associated with Venus. Venus in Sanskrit is called Shukra, which actually means seed or sperm. So it's very much associated with this kind of juicy, vital energy that is reflected in sexuality and the sexual organs. The kidneys also, because of the water, it being water element, and the kidneys processing the water in the body, are associated with Venus. So looking at Venus, if somebody has kidney problems, we would definitely look at Venus. And Venus was considered to be, in the Vedic tradition, the teacher of the demigods. The demigods are the beings who are up there in some heaven somewhere, partying all the time, enjoying luxuries and kind of lustful, and unlike the gods themselves, who are much more priestly and much more into spirituality. So if you have a strong Venus, you might be good at teaching practical things about design, making things beautiful, gardens, architecture, things that have to do with comforts and luxuries would have a connection with Mercury. And of course, marriage, relationships. If Venus is afflicted, there may be issues around relationships. It may be hard, to form good relationships. Then on a physical level, Venus is very, very important when it comes to serious diseases such as autoimmune disease and cancer. And the reason for this is that same energy, we call it ojas in Sanskrit, in Ayurveda, that juicy, vital energy that is used for sexuality is also what we need to stay healthy and rejuvenate after stress. So if we have good ojas, It's a protection against cancer, against autoimmune conditions. And I've done studies and written papers specifically on cancer and autoimmune disease and how it reflects in the chart. And I definitely found this strong correlation with problems with Venus associated with serious autoimmune and cancer and serious illnesses such as that. The stone associated with Venus are diamonds. Diamonds are the girl's best friend, as they say. And the metal is copper, which has the quality of transmitting electricity, for example. So we can kind of see how that's a signature for relationships. And yogurt is a food very much associated with Venus. And Venus, again, the water element, the seed syllable associated is Vam. Next, we'll talk about Mars. Mars is the planet associated with the fire element, especially the lower vibration of fire, the part that involves violence, inflammation, heat as opposed to light. So fire has light and it has heat. Light is more associated with the sun, and the heat is more associated with Mars. The name in Sanskrit for Mars is Mangala, which means may you be auspicious. So because Mars has some uncomfortable correspondences and qualities, we try to make that auspicious by calling him an auspicious name, Mangala. That is the explanation as to why Mars is called Mangala. So our willpower, our strength, our ability to execute plans. Mars is considered to be the general of the army, the head of the army, who's taking his orders from the king. The king is the sun, and the general is Mars, who's ruling with an iron fist and keeping the soldiers under control and sending them into battle, as you can see in this picture of Greek god Ares. So the being protective is a Mars quality. So, for example, herbs like echinacea and garlic, which are stimulants to the immune system and help the immune system, those are herbs that are associated with Mars. As are chili peppers, because of that heat and that burning. Chili peppers are also associated with Mars. And, they're also insecticides. They actually kill things. Garlic and chilies. That's why one reason they can be helpful in our system. But that burning quality, definitely associated with Mars. If you've ever tasted echinacea, it has that kind of quality as well. So courage and this phrase, might makes right. In Sanskrit, Mars is known as Putra Bhumi, which means the son of the earth, because here on planet Earth, the strongest and the fiercest and the bravest and the most daring are the one who win. And that's kind of what Mars is all about. On a more subtle level, Mars can also be associated with the energies in the body that can be worked with through doing yoga, Tai Chi, developing your prana for energy, healing, occult knowledge. So it's not all bad stuff associated with Mars. None of the planets are all good or all bad. When Mars is afflicted or malefic, it can cause accidents. It can cause inflammation, fighting, not getting along with people. It can be one of the planets that afflicts Venus and causes difficulties and fights and irritability in relationships. But it also brings mechanical skills and technical ability. People who are really good at mechanical or technical things can have a very, very strong Mars associated with that. It's associated again with the nervous system, because the sun is the king, which is associated with the brain and the head, and Mars is the general that carries out the impulses or the orders from the brain, and that's the nervous system. So Mars is associated with the nervous system. So having hypersensitive nerves can be due to an affliction of Mars. I actually have that in my chart. And yeah, I can suffer from nervous exhaustion and that kind of thing, which I directly attribute to the affliction of Mars in my chart. So the kinds of thoughts that we get from having Mars influencing us is how to increase power. Mars is really about power and dominance, that sort of thing. So as I mentioned, accidents and cutting. So surgery is also associated with Mars when you're in a period, a planetary period of Mars, because in Vedic astrology, we go through these different periods where different karmas tend to arise. And if you go through a Mars period, it might be time when you have a surgery or you have an accident, or you get an inflammation in some part of your body, depending on where Mars is placed. The stone associated with Mars is the red coral, and the metal is iron, not surprisingly. It's a good metal for fighting. And and of course, fevers and getting hot under the collar or getting an actual fever. And the seed syllable is rum. Next element is the wind, and this brings us to Saturn, the old man who brings death, disease, suffering. The wind element, as I said, takes away the life pranas by blowing away, dissipating, drying everything out, drying out the ojas of the water element, and taking away the fire, just everything becoming very cold and dry. And if you think about what happens as people age and they become more stiff, more brittle, kind of dried out, your skin gets dry, you suffer from constipation, everything gets, more brittle, I guess is the word, less flexible. All of that is attributed to Saturn. So Saturn is associated with the bad karmas that cause rebirth. We have good karmas that are reflected things. By good karmas, I mean things that bring us happiness. And by bad karmas, I mean the things that bring us suffering. Not that suffering is bad in itself, because sometimes when we're able to endure suffering or transform it into compassion, it actually is a wonderful teacher for us. And some of the most compassionate and kindest and most wonderful people are people that have very strong Saturns, because they've seen a lot of suffering in their life. They've experienced a lot of separation, a lot of illness, a lot of pain, and that actually can mature us into becoming kinder and more compassionate to others, and from that point of view, improve us as human beings. So all of these death, decay, suffering, impurities, dirt are all associated with Saturn. The Sanskrit name for Saturn is Shani, which actually means gold or giver. So again, we're using an auspicious name for a difficult planet. Saturn rules the muscles, has to do with working hard, being under a lot of pressure, a lot of restrictions, a lot of contraction, sadness, and separation. So yeah, if you have an afflicted Saturn, you may find that you have to do things over and over and over again, and just feel a lot of pressure because they don't get done. Saturn is associated in the caste system in India with the lowest caste, the ones who do all of the stoop labor, all of the most difficult, dirtiest tasks, and then are frustrated and upset and suffering. It's associated with chronic disease, associated with people who are kind of narrow-minded and traditional. And it gives the thoughts of a beaten man how to take revenge. If you just kind of imagine, being in a situation where you're at the bottom of the totem pole, so to speak, and having to work really hard and getting no appreciation, and really having, that kind of desperation. Now, again, Saturn is not always like this. Saturn also gives really good work skills, really good management skills, and has some, obviously, all these planets have good qualities as well. But Saturn definitely gives a lot of difficulty. Chronic diseases, as I said, and the stone associated with Saturn is the blue sapphire. So in terms of strengthening Saturn, if someone wanted to do that, they would use a blue sapphire. There's a strong correlation between the moon and Saturn. The moon takes 28 days to go around the Earth, and Saturn takes 28 years to go around the zodiac. You may have heard people refer to their Saturn returns, and indeed, many people find age 28 and age 56 to be significant times because Saturn is returning to its natal position at that point. Often, when Saturn in transit is sitting on your natal Saturn like that, you can feel some intensity going on. I did write a paper on the moon and Saturn and how it relates to healing and disease, because the moon is the planet of healing and Saturn is the planet of disease. So how these two have these strong connections with each other is an article that I have written for an astrology journal. And the sound associated with the wind element, Saturn, is yam. And finally, just as Saturn brings us our sufferings and our illnesses and our uncomfortable karmas, Jupiter gives us our blessings and our good karmas. Jupiter is associated with being the divine teacher and priest. The Sanskrit name for Jupiter is Guru, which of course means teacher. And so Jupiter is known as the teacher and the teacher and the guide for the priests and the higher level of the gods. So it is the planet that brings our good fortune, is expansive, all-encompassing, peaceful, and really Jupiter is the planet of all the planets in our solar system with the strongest magnetic field. And that has to do with this ether element, which magnetizes all beings and brings them together in a harmonious way, so that instead of all these different separate parts and people and arguing and fighting and not working out, Jupiter brings this lovely magnetic harmonizing energy. And thoughts associated with Jupiter include improvement and good wishes for all sentient beings and the whole universe. And this includes so wisdom, wealth, any kind of good fortune, the spiritual path, happiness. If Jupiter is afflicted in your chart, you may gain a lot of weight because Jupiter rules fat. Jovial, the word jovial is from the word Jupiter, jovial being fat and happy. That's really what Jupiter is about. Or if you think about some of those Buddha statues where the Buddha is laughing and has a really big belly. That's kind of another kind of Jupiterian image. So fat is associated with Jupiter, including butter, fats that we eat, but also being fat. The organ, which is the largest organ in the body, the liver is associated with Jupiter as well. So if you have an afflicted Jupiter, it may cause liver problems, for example. Children and fruits are associated with Jupiter because it's kind of the good things that result, the good karmas. So children are kind of the fruit of marriage, just as fruit are the result of a healthy, happy tree. The stone that's associated with Jupiter is the yellow sapphire or topaz, and you can also use, and the metal is tin. And again, if you have an afflicted Jupiter, you may go too far in the direction of overeating, over-enjoyment, and leading to a kind of sluggishness and getting fat, that kind of thing. I gained a ton of weight when I was in a period of Jupiter. I gained like 30 or 40 pounds. And then when I went into my Saturn period, I lost it again. And the sound associated with Jupiter is hum. Now I'm going to move on. Now that we've talked about the 5 planets that relate to the 5 elements, I'm going to talk about 4 other, we could call them entities, that we use in astrology, both Vedic astrology and tropical astrology. I'm going to call them planets, but they're not actually planets, because a planet is a body that revolves around the sun or a star. But in Vedic astrology, we just refer to them as grahas, which is the Sanskrit word for planet, which means to grasp, because they grasp us with their particular karmas as we descend into existence, into life. So the sun is also associated with fire, as is Mars, as I had said earlier, but the sun is the more subtle level, more higher level of fire. It represents the light of the soul, the oneness, the one reality. But on the other hand, it also represents a sense of self, an identity, an ego. For example, in Western astrology, we generally associate ourselves with our sun signs, like I'm a Cancer or I'm a Scorpio. That's referring to where the sun was, which sign of the zodiac the sun was at the time of your birth. So sun signs are most important. But in Vedic astrology, the ascendant, what was rising at the time of your birth, and the moon sign are more important than the sun. And that is because in Asia, how you harmonize with people, how you connect with people, and the state of your consciousness is more important than this sort of self-identity that we have here in the West. If you have an afflicted sun, you may have issues like low self-esteem or confusion of identity, not quite sure who you are or what you're doing. So those are some afflictions. And if you have a strong sun, you may be very good at being a leader in a very noble way, being a good father or a good authority figure. It gives you good vitality. The sun is also associated with government because the sun is considered to be the one who follows the Dharma, as we show here. The Sanskrit word is Surya, which Su means good, Arya means he who follows the Dharma. And so the sun is the definition of universal law because he rises in the east very predictably. No matter what else is going on in the world, he rises in the east and he sets in the west. So his motion defines our world and our solar system and defines time and gives us everything we need, from the light of the sun, the radiance of the sun. All the life happens on planet Earth. So he is our center, and he is the way, the Dharma, which means, the sort of universal law and the universal path. So this is very good for spirituality. Having a strong sun can be very good for spirituality, but can also make you a little bit of a solitary person because the sun burns if you get too close to it. So people with strong suns may like to spend more time by themselves, and sometimes that can lead to some loneliness depending on other influences on it. So for socially, as I say here, it can be mildly malefic, could cause some burning, can be kind of intense to be around, but it's very good for spirituality. Wealth is associated with the sun, resources, etc. And being famous, shining like the sun, being famous is associated with a strong sun as well. The stone associated with the sun is the ruby. And as I said earlier, the head is the part of the body associated with the sun, as well as the heart and the spine. So very central organs for us, definitely. And as we talked about earlier, fire is associated with sight. So the sun also, if you have an afflicted sun, it could cause problems with sight as well, and fever and inflammation to some extent, especially if Mars is involved in addition. And the seed syllable is Ram again. And so the second luminary, the first luminary is the sun, which is the source of light, like the father of our solar system, but difficult to receive all that heat and all that brilliance. You can't really look straight at the sun. Whereas the moon receives that light of the sun and reflects it in a very cool and soothing and nurturing and nourishing way. So the moon is like the mother. and the water element. And the sun and the moon are the two luminaries, the father sun and the mother moon. And they both give us light. However, the moon's light is considered to be more healing, more nurturing, more kind. So the moon is associated with children, mothers, popularity. People with strong moons are often very popular because just like the moon doesn't favor any particular child and shines her nourishing rays on all beings equally, people who have a strong moon tend to just be friendly to everyone, and everyone loves them because they're just kind and friendly to everyone. So it's a great thing. Singing and music are connected with the moon. Healing, of course, medicinal herbs are connected with the moon, and picking them at the right time according to the phases of the moon can be very important. And our consciousness, our mind, not the quality of Mercury, which is more about comparing and reasoning and putting facts together and putting lists together, but the moon actually has to do with consciousness. Jupiter has to do with wisdom, and the moon has to do with consciousness. So meditation, consciousness, the mind, which is always moving around and always changing and going into different moods, waxing and waning. And there can be a difference in the quality of the moon depending on when you were born. People who were born near a full moon, the time of a full moon, tend to have much more radiant types of personalities and more radiant mind. That's more of a kapha quality. Whereas people who are born closer to the new moon, when the moon is dark, tend to have more anxiety, more internal, more fear, and it's more of a vata type of moon. So the dosha, the Ayurvedic dosha, depends on whether the moon is waxing or waning. So the stone associated with the moon is the pearl, which makes sense, coming out of the water. And Venus is more, just comparing it a little bit with the moon, Venus is more about desire and love and attachment, whereas the moon is much more of a motherly kind of love, more of compassion and kindness. So moon is again at more of a high level. So the fluids in the body are affected by the moon, just as the tides of the earth are affected by the moon. The fluids in our bodies are also affected, including the hormones, the blood, the lymph. The moon is also connected with nutrition and fertility, being able to have children, dairy products, because again, this nurturing quality, things that are made from milk, are very much associated with the moon. So having a good moon will give you, a peaceful mind and good digestion probably, and be a kind of nurturing, motherly person. Whereas if your moon is afflicted, there could be, some insecurity, some anxiety, some problems with hormones or digestion or nutrition, digesting milk even. And the sound associated with the moon is Vam. Now that we've talked about the two luminaries, the sun and the moon, which give us our light, I'm going to talk about two points. They're actually mathematical points. In Vedic astrology, they're called shadow planets. In tropical astrology and regular astrology, they're referred to the north and south nodes of the moon. And they aren't anything. They are actually places. And this diagram explains it. So if you look up at the top where it says the northern point, where there's a black circle, and you look down here at where it says southern point, you'll see that those are where north and south nodes and Rahu and Ketu. And what this is showing is that the moon is traveling like this on this ecliptic or this oval, and the sun is traveling, went the wrong direction. The sun is traveling like this, and the moon is traveling like this. And if the sun and the moon are actually at these 2 points where they're paths intersect, that's what causes an eclipse, either a solar or lunar eclipse. So astronomically, the north and south nodes are the eclipse points. They are the points where if the sun and the moon are located at those points, we have an eclipse. And so just as the sun and the moon give us light, the north and south nodes of the moon take away the light. And the sun and the moon travel in sunwise direction, east to west, and the nodes go the opposite direction. So they are kind of like the anti-light. They take away the light. And so they are considered very, very important in Vedic astrology, and they're used in Western tropical astrology as well. They're always shown on charts of either Eastern or Western astrology. And they are actual mathematical points, as I said, but known in Vedic astrology as the shadow planets, and for the reason I just mentioned, because they take away the light of the luminaries. I'm going to tell you a story about how the North and South Node came to be, both in Kabbalistic astrology and in Vedic astrology. The North and South Nodes are known as a serpent, as you can see in the right-hand picture. And the North Node is the head of the serpent, and the South Node is the tail of a serpent. So I'm going to tell you this story from the Vedic tradition, which explains how these nodes came to be. Once upon a time, the gods and the demons, or our own light and dark sides, our own hopes and fears, represented here by the gods over here on the right and the demons over here on the left, were churning the ocean of milk in order to try to extract the Amrita, the divine nectar, out of the ocean of milk. And they were working together, just as the light and dark sides of our being need to harmonize and work together. And just as the drop came out, this drop of Amrita came out, this serpent swept down and drank the drop. And Vishnu, who is the preserver of the universe, the one who brings harmony to everything, took his chakra, which was his weapon, which is a wheel, and chopped the serpent in half. And the head is Rahu, and the tail is Ketu. So basically Rahu, which is the north node of the moon, represents all of our desires, all of our passions, all of the things that we want that we never feel satisfied about. That sense of dissatisfaction and having to constantly go for more is really associated with Rahu. And in some iconography, in the Vajrayana tradition, for example, Rahu is covered with heads all over. He's like a serpent with all these heads, all these faces all over his body. And because he's just one big hungry head, if you can imagine never being able to get full because you don't have a stomach, but you just are hungry all the time. So that bottomless pit feeling of just needing more and more and more is Rahu. And Ketu is the opposite. Ketu is the tail of the serpent, so it has to do with egolessness, renunciation. It's associated with the deity Ganesh, whose head was chopped off by Shiva, his father, and then replaced with an elephant head. So it can be connected with a kind of intuitive wisdom. Both of these can be quite destructive for health and make conditions difficult to diagnose because they're shadow planets, so they kind of take away the light. But Ketu is more beneficial spiritually. Now Rahu, the north node, does have good qualities. It can help one to, explore and do a lot of research. People who are researchers and want to keep finding new things and going into foreign lands, that kind of thing can be associated with Rahu. And Ketu is associated with subtle energy systems such as homeopathy and acupuncture. And it says right in the Vedic scriptures, Ketu is a Buddhist. So people with a strong Ketu may have some connection with Buddhism. So that summarizes the 9, what we call planets, or the 9 entities that we look at when we do a reading and we look at your horoscope. And once we know something about what those uh, entities are, it's like the planets are people and the signs of the zodiac are places. So how are those people doing in those different places? How is that person in that house, and who is that person with? Are Venus and Mars together in a house? How is that working? Which house are they in? So that's really what it comes down to. We need to start understanding the signs of the zodiac and the houses, which is beyond what we're going to do today. It's just too much for one introductory talk. But you can see here, starting up here with Aries, the ram, and then here's the bull, Taurus, the bull, Gemini, the twins, Cancer, the crab. This is in Vedic and tropical astrology. We have the same signs going on here. And just to show you, here's an old block print from a Western astrology book that shows how these different signs are associated with different parts of the body. For example, here's Aries up on the upper right, associated with the head. So if you had some afflictions to the sign Aries, you might suffer from headaches or have other kinds of problems in your head. And then you can see down here, just below Aries, here's Taurus with a line pointing to the throat. And so people who have afflictions to Taurus might have problems with their throat, or maybe if they have some good planets there or good influences, they might be a really good speaker. So these are some ways, just to give you an idea. Just if you go all the way down the right-hand column, to the second to the bottom, you'll see the scorpion, and you can see that it's associated with the genitalia. So problems with the sexual organs may be associated with Scorpio. On the other hand, you could, if you have strong energies there, also be prone to Kundalini experiences, because that's the base of the spine as well, and energies going up the spine. So these are some of the ways that we can relate astrology to physical conditions in the body, just on a really simple level. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about this outer wheel here on the next slide. You can see that we have on this inner wheel the signs of the zodiac, and then on this outer wheel is a more ancient form of astrology that I would like to introduce to you. So these are known as the lunar mansions. And just as the sun defines the 12 houses of the zodiac, if you can start over here on the left and see number 1, you see that's Aries, the ram. And then here, number 2 is Taurus, the bull, etc. Here's Gemini down here, number 3, the twins, or the couple as they're known, more of a mating couple in the Sanskrit, in the Vedic tradition. Number 4 is Cancer, the crab. Just as the sun defines these signs as he goes through the year and brings the yang or the male influence in, the moon goes through these 27 stages. If you look at the outer wheel, starting with this horse over here on the left, the moon goes through 21 lunar mansions. And this system of astrology, the lunar mansions, with the 27 houses of the moon, is more ancient than the solar system of the zodiac. But it was lost during some time in the West, but it is still very, very important in Vedic astrology. Each of these lunar mansions is associated with a deity, and it is also associated with a mantra, and it also gives a Shakti, or a divine spiritual, feminine spiritual energy. So understanding yourself through this lunar feminine yin system is really a very, very beautiful thing, and is one of the factors that I bring in when I do a reading to people. Is I explain to them the position of the planets in their chart, not just from the solar male side of things, but also from this more ancient female side of the lunar mansions, of the 27 lunar mansions. They're very, very beautiful and very profound. And I find that it's just extremely fulfilling and nurturing to find out and to discover yourself and your karmas through the view of the lunar mansions. The other thing that I really like about Vedic astrology, which is why I studied it and why I practice it and teach it, is because it comes with remedial measures. It's not just about kind of telling you what's going on psychologically, but it's about really looking in depth into all areas of your life and coming up with ways to finesse the more difficult karmas in your life. Some of the traditional ways include using gems. For example, here in the center, we have the ruby, which strengthens the energy of the sun. Above it, we have the diamond, which is associated with Venus. And then to the right, going clockwise, we have the pearl associated with the moon. And here is a piece of red coral. Below that, associated with Mars. And here we have a yellow, probably a topaz. We have a few stones that look like they might be associated with Jupiter. This here is a blue sapphire associated with Saturn. And up here to the left of the diamond is an emerald associated with Mercury. So wearing gemstones, saying a mantra before you put them on for the first time, and choosing an auspicious time to put those gemstones on are all part of a Vedic reading and a Vedic prescription. My favorite, however, is mantras and sound healing. Mantras can either be more lengthy for people who are more devotional or more interested in getting into a Vedic tradition and doing longer mantras, but also the seed syllables can be used, the ones that we discussed earlier, but there are several other systems that I work with specifically using sound healing. So you can basically give yourself an energy treatment by chanting a sound which will vibrate in your body and change the vibration in your body, just the way if somebody did an energy healing on you or did an acupuncture treatment. So it's a very profound way of healing if you are willing to put in some time to do some chanting. Some other remedies include lifestyle activities. As an example, if your moon was having a tough time in your chart, one of the ways you might be able to help to shift those karmas that you have around the moon would be to help mothers. Maybe go out and do some volunteer work to help mothers and help children. And that's a way to shift your karmas, is by actually going out and offering something to society that that will help to shift your karmas. Nutrition and diet is another thing. Certain foods, as I had mentioned earlier, yogurt and milk, for strengthening the water element and Venus and the moon. And there are other ones as well, of course, associated with different planets. And herbs and other kinds of natural treatments can also be indicated by the chart. And I gave some examples about for example, the herbs associated with Mars. Another example would be lotus. I make alchemical elixirs, and lotus petals are a wonderful medicine for calming the mind and helping the mind to feel more clear and especially calm and balanced. And I've seen it work sometimes instantaneously on people who are just all scattered and confused, and you give them a little bit of lotus elixir and their minds just settle down quite a bit. So these are some remedies that you can use in conjunction with the astrology reading once the problems have been identified. One more principle I wanted to explain here in terms of understanding, well, what is the difference between Vedic astrology and tropical astrology? It has to do with what an astronomical phenomena called the precession of the equinox. And here is a picture of it. You can see up above here at sort of 1 o'clock on the circle, it says Polaris, the North Star. and then it shows this line going through down here. And what this is demonstrating is that the Earth is actually wobbling on its axis. It's kind of going like this. It's not spinning like a top spins straight up, and then when it starts to get tired, it starts to wobble. The Earth is wobbling like this, and that wobble causes our relationship to the fixed stars to change. We're not the ones, the fixed stars are not moving, but we are wobbling. The Earth is wobbling. So it takes almost 26,000 years, 25,920 years for one complete wobble. And it's going this direction. So what this means is that about 2,000 plus years ago, when astrology was first, the astrology that we're doing was first proposed or invented, when it was springtime, March 21st, the sun was entering Aries right here. So that was considered the beginning of spring. But now, on March 21st, the sun is actually not in Aries anymore. The sun is in Pisces. Here it's showing it actually in Aquarius. But in Vedic astrology, we consider the sun to be in Pisces at that time. So Vedic astrology is based on where the planets really are in relation to the fixed stars, as opposed to tropical astrology, which is talking about where the planets would have been had you been born 2,000 years ago or something like that. So basically, Vedic astrology is more accurate because it is tracking this precession of the equinox and tracking which constellations the planets really are in, rather than where they would have been 2,000 years ago. And this is why I thought, why would I study tropical astrology? It's not based on the real thing. I'm interested in the real position of the planets. And that is an explanation as to why Vedic astrology is the accurate system, and why, if you do come for a Vedic reading, for example, and let's say you were born April 1st, and you may have considered yourself an Aries, meaning that your sun was in Aries. Actually, when you were born, your sun was in Pisces. That is the truth. So that concludes the information that I'm giving you in this talk. The question is how you might want to proceed if this interests you. If you would like to do a reading, you are welcome to contact me. I will send you an intake form where I'll need your birth information, your place, date, and time of birth. And I'll also want to know what you are interested in exploring. I really consider Vedic astrology a method of guidance and counseling. So I like to know what is your main concern in life. We can focus on career, we can focus on relationship, we can focus on health, we can focus on spiritual path. Really any area of life we can look at in some and try to find what the issues are there, and what are some remedies that could help you to finesse your karmas, make lemonade out of the lemons that you have, because we all have Saturn somewhere in our chart. We all have Mars and Rahu. So we all have things that can be uncomfortable or challenging, and there are ways to use those energies in positive ways and to learn to do that. So you're welcome to contact me about a reading. If you're interested in perhaps studying this more, you might want to go to the website www.vitalism.us, and there you can watch some other presentations on vitalistic healing. This is the program where I teach Vedic astrology, plant alchemy, and some Buddhist spiritual practices to help people to become healers that work with the vitalistic energies of the universe. So I hope you enjoyed that, and please be well and take care, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions.